everyone, and welcome to the Hardcore Finance Show. Today, we're excited to host Ben Narasin, who's a venture partner at NEA, a global venture capital firm focusing on helping entrepreneurs build transformational businesses with nearly $24 billion in cumulative committed capital. NEA does a lot of their investments in tech and healthcare. Ben himself is a prolific entrepreneur and a highly regarded early-stage investor with mega hits such as Dropcam, Lending Club, TellApart, Kabbage, and Zenefits. Like many of NEA's partners, Ben's path to investing is rooted in his own entrepreneurship. He founded several companies before launching his investing career, including fashionmall.com, one of the first e-commerce companies out there during the dot-com era, and which he took public in 1999. Ben is always in the hunt for the founder that, quote, in his own words, makes him say wow. And with that, welcome, Ben. I think our listeners will definitely say wow listening to this interview.
Thanks for having me. You did the whole intro for me. I don't have to say a word now.
Well, thanks so much for coming. Why don't we start? I know I just did the intro for you, but maybe fill in some color about briefly how you got started in the VC space, how you made that jump from taking your company public into investing. And specifically, you write about this Ben rule about how the wrong venture capitalist can actually jeopardize the founder. We'd love to hear a little bit more.
Well, let's break it into two pieces. Let's start with sort of a little bit of color on the background and then talk about my view, how my background actually influenced that quote unquote Ben rule. So I was an entrepreneur for 25 years. I was sort of born an entrepreneur and I'll die one. I just happened to be living vicariously through other entrepreneurs. And, that time as an entrepreneur and founder was sort of before the era. Well, first of all, it was on the East Coast. And secondly, it was before the era of rampant amounts of venture capital. I was just thinking the other day, wow, what would it be like if I was coming of age in the last decade instead of when I did? And it's sort of like, yeah, I think I would have been a billionaire. Like, I'm not, but, I just had so much drive and tenacity, which I believe is incredibly important for entrepreneurs. I had a bit of arrogance too. I'll certainly admit that. I mean, I took my company public when I was 33. I think I thought I was a pretty cool dude. I've been taught many lessons about, look, as one person showed me once, there's a thin line between arrogance and confidence. And on one side of the line, everybody wants you to lose. And the other side of the line, everybody wants you to win. So, I think I've become a more well-rounded and humble person. Anyway, 25 years as an entrepreneur was an amazing journey. And it sort of culminated in that e-commerce business because, I started businesses that I had a passion about personally. And then I would sort of get bored of them and I would take everything I'd made from that business and roll it into the next one. And I'd been using the internet long before the web came along. But when Berners-Lee came up with www, I was like, oh my God, this is going to change the world and it should change it for everybody. And I wanted my part of it. So I basically tossed aside what I've now come to understand is called a lifestyle business, i.e. high margin and positive cash flow, but never going to change the world and be a multi-billion-dollar public company, in order to start one of the first e-commerce companies in the world before people even knew what the internet was. That was in 93. And as you mentioned, I took that public in 99. Well, now to move forward with sort of how that influenced me and my thinking as relates to what I now call the Ben rule, which is more about just giving entrepreneurs clarity about whether they should be bothering to pitch somebody in venture or not at all. And I'll come to that in a second. But when I had a public company, I had a board of 4, myself, a guy I trusted, and 2 guys that I just did not get along with. If I had raised venture capital and they had control, I never would have survived. I would have been fired. My life was miserable. Every board meeting was just painful. And I literally, and I mean that in the true sense of the word, learned the meaning of the word acrimony in a board meeting. I had one of the very first BlackBerries before anybody had those. And, the guy I trusted, I'm screaming and another guy's screaming at me and, you're so entitled and, you're an old guy, doesn't know what you're talking about. Anyway, whatever. It was not good. And the guy looked at me, he's like, Ben, I just wish these board meetings could be less acrimonious. And I was like, type. Oh, now, in fairness, I guess it's a good thing that my life had been so pleasant to date that I had never understood what the term acrimony even meant. But, it was something I will always remember. So when I work with entrepreneurs, I was a seed investor for about a decade. My obsession is trying to help them pick the right investor. Because as a seed investor, I am often helping them raise their rounds, not just even the Series A, sometimes the Bs, and even on 1 or 2 occasions, the Cs. And I want them to have the right board member because, once you take venture capital, you're in a long-term marriage and it comes with a one-way prenup and you're not the one that wrote it. So, I want my entrepreneurs to avoid the pain that I suffered. And I think that's true of most of the mistakes I made. Like in general, if I made a mistake, I want my entrepreneur to learn from it and not make it themselves, which is why I try to be helpful wherever I can. The Ben rule, though, is mainly about, I always like the Moore's law, so I want to have a law after myself. So Ben's rule, Ben's law, is that, if an entrepreneur is trying to understand if they're a right fit for venture capital, because here's the thing that I think is a common piece of advice I give entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs go to VCs because that's where money is, but it's not the right flavor of money for most entrepreneurs. I don't think anybody would be surprised to hear that if you're going to open a pizza parlor in your town because there's no pizza parlor, which sounds like a great idea to me, you're not going to want to raise venture capital for that. That's a different type of business. But in general, if you want to figure out if a firm is a good fit for you at a baseline, not about the humans or anything else, but just as a starting point, think about what you believe your ultimate exit could be in your wildest dreams, the way you're going to drive the company. Because by the way, people drive to exits that they envision. Like my daughter's a rock star runner, but I'll tell you, no matter how hard she runs, when she crosses the finish line, boom, she's done. She's given it all. Same thing with any entrepreneur. They drive towards a goal. So you take what you perceive as that ultimate outcome that you would like to see happen. You multiply that by 20%, which is the average ownership of a venture firm. And if that number is not at least 50% of the fund you're pitching, you shouldn't be pitching that fund. If you think you can drive this forward and get bought for $100 million, which could be great for you because you might own 20, 30, 40, 50% of the company and make a lot of money doing it. Well, 20% of 100 million is $20 million. You're going to have to pitch very small funds because a VC can only do a very finite number of deals. They can only serve on a finite number of boards. Time is one of our most precious commodities. And if they're going to do that, they have to believe that I used to say, that any deal they do can return the fund. And I still think that's true for the very best investors, but it becomes harder when, as an example, NEA is a $3.6 billion fund. So now I've started to say it has to be material to the fund. And I think half is materiality. Now, realistically, I still believe personally, I want to return the entire fund. So, it's just, that's a mismatch that I think people often don't understand. They think their $100 million goal is going to be a fit. Like someone said, yeah, but I returned 10X. Well, okay, good. That's great for you. And it's, nobody's going to yell at you, but net, if somebody put in money at $10 million valuation, you exited 100, at the end of the day, if they've got $2 billion to return to their LPs, the people that gave them the money that they're borrowing that they're renting to invest, you think that $20 million is going to matter? They got $1.98 billion to go. So you've got to be material to the fund. And if you're not, you shouldn't be focusing on that fund. Now that's just the entry-level way to think about whether you should pitch the fund. The most important thing, though, is really picking the right human being. The right human can be the difference between success and failure sometimes, or it can, just be, Mike Maples once said to me something like, hey, my number one law or one of my top 3 laws is do no harm. And that alone puts me in the top 10%. I'd argue that there's a much larger number of people that are in the do harm category. But yes, sometimes just having the person that doesn't get in your way, like having a board member that wants to micromanage you or tell you how to run your company, like it's not the job of a board member to tell you what to do. It is, I believe, the job of a board member to help you and encourage you and give you counsel and different ways of looking at things and connections and everything else. But net, the tragic reality is, here's another quote. A friend of mine, Dave Hornick from August Capital once said, he compared himself, he's big into music. And he's like, I used to always think as a board member, I was like a DJ with one of those massive mixing tables with all the levers and dials and stuff, and I could control everything. But then one day I looked behind the table and it wasn't plugged in. The only thing I have is the on-off switch. You can choose to fire or not fire the CEO, and that is the limit of it. Now, you can tell them what to do if you want. I don't agree with that. I think that's the wrong way to do things. But if they say no and do their own thing, which, by the way, the most aggressive and strong and successful entrepreneurs and the ones that fail are likely to do, then, you only have the nuclear option. And I've never fired an entrepreneur. I had to promote an entrepreneur once on someone else's behalf. But, 80 companies, like, it's not that they've all survived. Some of them got moved on. But that's not in my repertoire. That's not what I want to do. I want to back people that I trust and believe in, I think are going to do great things. And I have actually not done rounds in companies explicitly because I didn't feel like I could trust the entrepreneur, which I still think about a lot, because the one instance I'm thinking of, I couldn't trust the entrepreneur. He retraded a deal on me. But that deal was one we would have paid $300 million for, and it just is about to go out in a public entity as a $5 billion company. So, maybe I'm a little too obsessive with my need to trust entrepreneurs, but do I really want to take a ride with someone I can't trust, that I don't know if I can help? I don't know. Life's too short, as they say. So anyway, that's my ramble on that topic.
No, that's great. I wish more entrepreneurs would understand this, because many times it feels, especially when you have a term sheet, you're like, okay, great, I won. It's like, no, you're just getting started. Yeah. But yeah, I wanted to ask your opinion. So I'm here, I live in San Francisco, and I wanted to ask your opinion about the landscape, both in terms of the VC landscape and also in terms of the industry landscape. So it seems that here in Silicon Valley, there's these waves of like things that are trendy and everybody piles into them. So what's your opinion on which industries are ripe for change currently? And do you see a mismatch between basically where startups are forming and where funding is going, and where change actually needs to happen, or where there's potential for change to happen?
It's a very rational question. I'm a little bit of an outlier on this. I always like to sort of use stories to illustrate, experiences that I've had, or quotes from my friends. I can't remember who told me this one, but they said, venture capitalists are like penguins on an ice floe. They all waddle over to the edge and they look in the water, and they know there are fish in there to eat, but they also worry that there might be walruses or seals or something else that will kill them. But then one day, one of them slips in the water and doesn't die and eats a fish. And then all of a sudden, the rest of them pile in after, right? And so, yes, there are trends where sort of once it hits, it's almost like VCs need to see proof that it can be big enough. And all of a sudden, it's all big enough, So maybe nobody cared about NFTs for a long time until it got big enough, and now everybody cares about it. But having said that, personally, I'm not a thesis investor. Two, I'm not really a momentum investor, although momentum is very important to me in a lot of cases. And I'm not a sort of trend guy. What I look for is entrepreneurs that, as you used in my lead up, make me say, wow, right? Like, I want an entrepreneur that's showing me a future that's really exciting. In fact, I often have, let's face it, entrepreneurs don't always make it, right? Being an entrepreneur is the hardest job you can have if you're not a first responder. It's the hardest corporate cubicle job in the world. You wake up every morning and someone smacks you in the face. Things go wrong. I mean, I have so many stories about how things can go wrong. Anyway, so the mortality rate is high. I was looking at my own mortality rate over the last 13 years. I got some news I can share with you guys in a second, which is why I'm doing all that. But, probably 37% mortality rate, lower than the average in the industry, but still not immaterial. About a third of my companies just don't make it. So often what will happen is when I was a seed investor in a dedicated way, an entrepreneur would be trying, it wouldn't work. And they finally came to the conclusion it was never going to work. And they reach out and say, hey, it's not going to work. We've spent like 80 cents on the dollar, 60 cents on the dollar. Do you want the rest of it back? And my response was always the same, like, no, I bet on you. Figure out something new. And they'd ask me how to do that, and I'd give them my own personal advice on it. But eventually they would say, can I sit down with you and go over the ideas? Absolutely, of course. So they'd come to me. And then one of the first questions was always, what's hot now? I was like, that is the wrong question. Because what's hot now is probably too late for you. You need to figure out what's going to be hot in the future. The most exciting things are when an entrepreneur has a unique vision of the future that others don't have, where the things that other people think either are stupid or just doesn't occur to them become true later. It was a great thing for me. When I was young, I started my first business when I was 12. So, when you're an entrepreneur from age 12 to 37, people are very complimentary. They think it's fascinating. They want to hear all about it. Oh, you're so smart. And I used to always think, I'm nothing special. I'm just Ben. I'm just doing what I do, which happens to be entrepreneurship, instead of, obsessing over whatever football scores or baseball stats, which were never an interest of mine. But then I read this one quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson, which was basically, and probably the only quote I've ever read by him. I haven't read much of his stuff, but it was, when you believe that what is true for you in your heart of hearts is true for all men, that is genius. And the way I interpreted that was, when you come to realize that what was true for you before others understood it becomes true for all, that is genius. And it's not that I'm claiming I'm a genius. It's that it's its own distinct piece of insight and knowledge. And I was different in that way. I was ahead of it on everything I ever did. I mean, I started a web business in 1993. I would go to parties in New York City with my buddies, and basically everybody I knew in New York City that was doing well was a banker. And they'd say, oh, what are you doing now, Ben? I mean, I know you're an entrepreneur. What's going on with you? What's the new thing? And I was like, oh, I'm doing this internet business. And I always remember this. The guy turned to me, he's like, enter what? I was like, oh, maybe I'm a little ahead of it this time. And I was. Look, I had to bootstrap from 93 to 99 before I was able to take the company public. And I didn't raise any outside capital until I signed the underwriter's letter. So, it's, I think it's more important that entrepreneurs find the thing that they get passionate and excited about. Now, that's related to a topic, which is I do not like pivots. I do not fund companies because I think the entrepreneur is a genius and will figure something out, but I don't like their current idea. I have done that. I've done it 3 times. The entrepreneur was so impressive, I decided that even though I didn't like their idea, I was going to fund them. And in each case, I said to them, I don't like this idea. I don't think it's going to work, but I think you're phenomenal. I want to go along for the ride and see how it goes. And all 3 of them failed. So I want to fund great people with great ideas. I've funded post-pivot. My most exciting company is a company that started off doing something I would never have touched, but then they learned something along the way. And I think of that as often tacking into the wind. Like it's fine to sort of go where the heat is stronger once you realize that that's where it is. It's just, I don't like the idea of people sort of turning the boat around, sailing it back to shore, kicking the crew off, recrewing, and then starting off into the wild again. So, I do think it's sort of entrepreneurs find unique versions of the world, and that's how you find truly enormous opportunities. To be the 17th whatever, like I do read all my emails, even all the unsolicited ones. I will say in advance that I read them, but if I don't respond to them, that's because I'm not interested. It's not because I didn't read them. I really don't like it when it's like, hey, kicking this to the top of your inbox. Hey, I sent you this unsolicited email. Why don't I send it to you again? It's like, I read it the first time. Now, if they do that 3 times, I just send an unsubscribe note and hope they get the point. But I got to notice like blah, 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 a new neobank. And it's like, oh God, really? I mean, okay, you're only 10 years too late to that trend. So, are there opportunities to build materially sized businesses there? Yes. Are there opportunities to be the future leader in that category? That's hard. Occasionally, the late to the game player wins. Google, right?
Although you could say that Google was a very different technology than all the other ones that were trying to crawl on the website.
But categorically, it was still search, right?
That's true.
And so, yes, but they're like almost a one of. I mean, yes, Facebook followed Friendster and whatever that other thing was that was all about music that people used. I forget because I didn't use it. Anyway, but generally,
MySpace.
Yeah. But even there, it's a pretty small base and it's still early in the trend. So there is room. It's just the difference between being the 17th neobank and building a $50 million outcome or $100 million outcome and being and building a multi-billion-dollar outcome. Or the way I like to think about the world is I want to believe there's uncapped upside. And it's not that winner takes all. It certainly can be winner takes all or winner takes most, but it's not that first to market necessarily wins. But I do believe that first to brand wins. Once a consumer has identified somebody or something as the brand in that category, they tend to give disproportionate value and credit to that brand. And you see that over and over and over again. It happened for us at Dropcam. You think about consumer products like Fitbit. I mean, there were plenty of items before Fitbit, and there were plenty of items after, and I actually like some of them better, but that was the one that grabbed the consumer brand awareness. And I think the same thing is true in enterprise, right? So Microsoft Teams seems to have a lot of users because they appear to shove it into whatever people subscribe to they have anyway, but it feels to me like Slack's still the play. So, it's important to sort of grab that first position. I mean, that first position can be enormously valuable. And a lot of times, yes, it is first to market, but it isn't always. I guess that's the point I want to make clear.
Yeah. So there's a lot of interesting points here, but I want to zoom out a little bit. It seems like maybe to me is listening to you and a lot of things that Shimon and I discuss. There's a little bit of I think because with now a lot of digital transformation, people misunderstand 2 things: exponential growth, that's 1, and 2, network effects. And so you mentioned winner takes all versus winner takes most, or first to brand. I like to think of it as first to network effects almost. So there's a Microsoft, there's a Slack, Teams competition, but there is going to be very little, if ever, competition against a Facebook or a Google now, or a lot of these brands that come out first or not. Like you said, it doesn't matter. It's the one that's reaching network effects. And there's probably a fine line between fighting this uphill battle of getting to network effects in the beginning, right? If you're not the first one out of the gate, like going into the win, like you said, believing in your vision. Google believed in they were going up against Lycos back in the InfoSeek. Yahoo was the big behemoth and so on. So web crawler, Ask Jeeves. I mean, there were tons of these guys. Google was by far.
I was always surprised AltaVista didn't win. It felt like it had the right tech, but it was sort of trapped inside a deck. But
that's right.
I
used to love Lycos. I used to use Lycos all the time back in the day. But the point is, Google kind of pushed against it. Now they had a better product for sure. But how do you envision, or how do you maybe explain to your entrepreneurs, explain to the market, hey, once we get past this hurdle and we can reach network effects, then you start commanding a more and more secure moat. And I see this on a lot of industries, and especially in tech, because you're starting to grow by exponentially rather than linearly, right? Yeah. So Alexa is a perfect example of this in terms of voice recognition and the ability to understand commands. Same thing with Google Home. It's those two horses and really no one else.
Yeah, and that's fascinating, because let's sort of drill into that example for a second. When I first started out as an investor, this was actually before 2007. But let's call it 2007. I remember going to CES because I decided that the key thing for me to understand was the smart home. And there were all these competing standards. I think Zigbee, and I don't even remember the name of all of them. 2007. And now, I'd say starting 10 years later, around 2017, you actually have something that can unify the smart home. Well, two things. You have Alexa on the one side and you have Google Home on the other. But man, that's a long road. I mean, that's crazy time. I thought I was early, but I didn't know I was that early. Like, I was looking for a bet to make. I did not make any, in fairness. So, sometimes being too early is the same as being bankrupt, because your too earliness has to intersect with when the adoption curve kicks in, when that exponential growth starts to happen. It is always sad when you see your idea done by somebody else and winning. But the reality is, ideas are cheap and execution is dear. And fundamentally, you have to get lucky. Now, luck is influenced tremendously by how hard you work, but I don't care how hard you worked. If you were doing, smart home in 2006 or 2007, I don't know if you survived. Now, a lot of those standards are baked into the stuff that's out there now, but so maybe they did. I mean, I know entrepreneurs that worked their butts off for a decade and didn't make it. And then finally it kicked in. I've actually got an entrepreneur. I funded a company called Genies probably 7-8 years ago. And they had all these different pivots. But right now, wow, they're super exciting. But it was at least a 7-year journey to become an overnight success. They're doing avatars for Hero. That's my genie. Avatars mainly for celebrities. Like, I had to wait till they were done with the Kardashians avatars before they would do mine. They're going to do 3D ones so that the avatar can talk to you here on the Zoom. I've also got an investment in a company that'll sort of let me use a real world, the Oasis, where, Ready Player One style, where you will have an avatar of me that looks just like it's a deep fake video, except it's me talking. Whether it's me or me, I always say Bart Simpson, but he says, no, you can't, or Homer Simpson. You can't be Homer Simpson because we need a real face. So I don't know, Albert Einstein yapping away. So, it is, what I usually will say to entrepreneurs, like, I try to help where I can. I'm very much a tactical guy, like trying to help them the realities of the things they're dealing with that day. But ultimately, when everybody's on a quest for product market fit, and that's sort of what you're referring to, is when they finally find that and it goes from incremental to exponential. One of my favorite things to do is to be there when it happens and just tell them to enjoy it and say, look, there's nothing more exciting and nothing more that's a proof of product market fit that when your efforts to get adoption change from a push to a pull, when you're constantly trying to get people to adopt it and then all of a sudden everybody wants it and they're drawing it out. That's wow. I mean, the most recent example of that would probably be Clubhouse. When I didn't get to look at that round, somebody else in the firm did, but from what I understood, that $100 million round was done when they had something like hundreds or thousands of users. And then they went to millions of users, and then they went to millions of new users a month. I mean, just like insane growth. Now that does, one of the things, like I was talking to an entrepreneur that had an idea that I thought could be really amazing, but could really, it's like a lot of seed investing, if we talk about that specifically, is about thesis proof. You prove or disprove a thesis, and if you prove the thesis adequately, then you can go out and raise a material amount of money. When you're doing something social, that can be stratospheric growth. And what I was cautioning them to do is from day one, because they were going to be totally, and I said this to them, binary outcome. You're either going to go to 0 or you're going to be amazing. And maybe there's things in between, but net, this would have the kind of virality that people would drool over. But you've got to be super careful, because when that kicks in, you're not going to have time to fix things, right? So you need to build for scale. You're building right now for, small numbers of people. No, you got to build a system where whether you have one person or 1,000 people or 100,000 people or 1 million people, the burden isn't on you. They were doing something with video. I'm like, if you're hosting this video, figure out now how you don't have to push it into the handset. Do what you need to do. Figure it out with dozens of people, because when you got millions of people, I'll tell you this, I've got a company that just had to authorize $40 million for Amazon bills. Oh my God, it makes me want to puke. It's like, I actually abstained from that vote. I'm like, I can't do it. You know what kind of data center you can build for $40 million? Anyway, but I get why we don't want to do that, et cetera, et cetera. But when you build your system in the beginning, begin with the end in mind, right? If there's a possibility of going exponential and being phenomenal and insane and enormous, remember that everything you did in the beginning is going to sort of ripple up. And so if it costs you $1 a video call to have a video call and you're giving that away for free, that's fine when you've got hundreds of users, but you get 24 million users using you every month. I don't want to be there. So figure out how to get it from $1 to a quarter to a penny to 0. Like really focus on the small stuff. I get, and it's true, focus on the big stuff. The small stuff will take care of itself, because at that level, you're going to be able to get funded no matter what anyway, probably. But I also believe if you take care of the pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves. You gotta be mercurial, or really just detail oriented in terms of not mercurial at all, really focused on the minutia of what it takes to take cost out of the system, so that if you go exponential, you can survive and prosper and not end up having to raise money. Like, oh my God, I need $20 million to pay my AWS bill. Well, I mean, let's face it, VCs do love to hear that. But what happens is it changes the dynamic where now you have no choice but to raise a bigger round, and you may have to give up more of the company. It'll be more dilutive. You might have to raise money ahead of time. Now you're not running the company because you're out there raising the money, which every entrepreneur knows is a huge pain in the butt, no matter how well it goes. It's like it's taking time away from running the company. So build for big, like expect success and build for it. Don't try to fix it later.
Yeah, you mentioned some really interesting points there in terms of like being too early and basically timing the right time to launch something. And many times it's a function of the technological environment. So for example, people say about Facebook, the reason why they grew so fast is because they timed their launch with mobile and with data costs being low enough where you can upload enough pictures and you don't put a limit on pictures. And MySpace apparently at that time had a limit on how many pictures you can upload, and they didn't do mobile well. Or Google too. I heard that Google, the idea is that their way of indexing only worked once the costs of data became low enough. So I wanted to ask so now if we look at the macro landscape, right, it's very different. So, a lot of money printing, valuations are going through the roof, massive debt accumulation. So do you see any particular type of business that could thrive in this environment, or any particular type of business that, this environment is kind of creating headwinds for?
Well, I haven't thought about that much. I have thought a lot about sort of how COVID has changed things for people, but I will tell you there's a kernel inside of that I've spent a lot of time on, and that's relevant to something I'm doing right now, which is here's a quote. We were having a discussion across a partnership around a deal we were interested in. And the person leading the deal said as follows: well, it looks like it'll be about a $60 million pre on a Series A. So sort of a middle of the road valuation for a Series A. I mean, a year ago, it probably would have been 40. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I still remember funding a company in a seed round where I paid like $4 million. And I helped them raise a Series A, and that Series A went off at $24 million. And I was sitting with the entrepreneur because I was interested in participating, which I usually do not do. And I was sort of moping. It's like, what's wrong? Like, isn't this great? I'm like, it's great for you. You think I want to pay a 6x markup on on the last 6 months? And by the way, $24 million you're flipping pre-launch. You think that's rational? I'm really proud of you. It's great for you, but I'm writing you a check at a $24 million valuation. I thought it was out of the world that they would have paid that much. So, when $60 million becomes a middle of the road valuation for a Series A, which is just stunning, it reminds me why I love seed. Because seed, you can routinely do investing at 10 million and below. Now, in fairness, I paid more than I've ever paid for a seed deal about a year and a half ago. I think I paid about $25 million for a deal. And I am now, because the secondary market is so strong, selling shares in that company for a specific reason, which I'll now go into, and I'll make 40 times my money in 18 months. So, it doesn't matter if you pay 25 as long as you can sell at $1 billion. But, or two, in this case, their last round was like $1.5 billion. I think I'm selling more at like $2 or $3 billion. So, I'm getting a premium. But, I really love seed, and seed's what I've done successfully. So, this is basically breaking news, but about 1 week ago, we agreed, Scott Sendell, who runs NEA, and NEA came to me and said, we would like you to raise a freestanding seed fund. So I'm going to raise a freestanding seed fund, codenamed Purple Octopus, to talk about why, to really focus on that first round. I think of it as first logical round. That could be a formation, like Dropcam. I think I made 58 times my money on that. I funded that as a bunch of PowerPoint slides from a smart guy, right? So formation, pre-seed, seed. I brought a seed deal into NEA about the end of last year that was $10 million. I mean, it's getting crazy how big these seed rounds are getting. But his pre-seed was $1.5 million, and his pre-seed would be where I'd want to be, because rock star entrepreneur, exactly the kind of place I'd want to be. And now he's already out raising a $30 million Series A. I have no idea what the valuation on that'll be, but you can infer with the giving up 20%, that feels like about $150 million post. So anyway, I do think this reality has made the seed category that much more attractive. Prices have gone up in seed, but it's just in terms of the return you can get, things can get so exciting so fast. And this also brings up another reality, which is that there's now, I will always tell entrepreneurs when they're raising their A, hey, remember, the reason you should care so much about your board members, this is a 7 to 10 year journey if you want to become a public company. Now it's even longer. Sometimes it's 12 or 15 because so much money is available of public levels privately. If you can raise $3 billion privately, which I think was what Robinhood did, you don't need to go public right away. Now you can time it. Having said that, seed takes even longer because you're going in before the A. But the reality is there's many more opportunities for liquidity. There are robust secondary markets. And there's also another reality that people don't get. In the most exciting companies, existing investors often can't even get their pro rata. Like I was saying to an entrepreneur, that's what happened. He's like, isn't that illegal? I'm like, okay, well, first of all, there's a difference between contract law and criminal law. It is a breach of your agreement under the contract, but unfortunately, the reality is the new owner is going to want 20%, dilution is going to matter, everybody, blah, blah, blah. So in a lot of cases, even tier one firms are not getting their pro rata, which means they go out and try to buy it elsewhere. So there's a lot of investors that are buying out secondary shares in rounds. So you can actually take liquidity inside of a round when it's appropriate to do so. Generally speaking, I'm a long-term guy. I want to stay there till the bitter end, but I am fascinated by the fact that there's more of these opportunities. It doesn't mean you sell your whole stake, but you might take some money off the table. So that's sort of interesting.
Yeah. So speaking of long-term, this brings up to a beautiful thing. So today, the president is going in front of Congress, and he's going to talk about, among other things, increasing long-term capital gains taxes. Ugh. And well, I think you and us, we share the same opinion, but I think what's important here, and we did a video on this earlier today about capital gains and, how it's beyond this whole mantra that I think the far left wants upon the flesh, this whole taxing the rich. But you're skin deep in funding entrepreneurship and funding companies. Can you just I want to explore this a little bit. Let's dig in. How is this going to affect entrepreneurship? And many people, I think, miss this point, how capital gains taxes affect risk premium and the ability for people to take risk. And what do these exit events mean? And I guess walk us through this, but maybe give us a sense of, there's a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, and there's this maybe image of a guy in the garage and coding and then making a whole bunch of, $100 million and exiting and living the bro life. But there's a long tail in America of mom and pop entrepreneurs that have worked their whole life and will have one exit event, one liquidity event, call it $1.5 million. And now we're going to get taxed up to 55% of their wealth. So, when you're looking to make bets, or you're advising an entrepreneur that's looking to put away, 10 years of their life into something, how is this policy going to affect that?
I'm really worried. I mean, I remember, so you remember I said I was an entrepreneur from the age of 12? Well, I got my first job when I was 11. I worked for 25 cents an hour in credit. So that was a weird one. But net, when I was young, I still remember when I got my first actual paycheck, one that had taxes taken out. And I remember looking at it going, at that time, I think they were taking 55% of my pay. And I remember looking at it thinking, I don't understand this at all. I'm giving the government more than I keep of the money I earned? I found that offensive. Now, I was a 15-year-old, right? And that probably was material in the influence of my realizing that the better way to accumulate personal wealth was to be an entrepreneur, right? Well, if it's all the same, how does that influence your thinking as an entrepreneur? But I think about it more from the lens of the investor. So, I had a great outcome as an entrepreneur. I got personal liquidity, a level that gave me an enormous amount of freedom. It allowed me to sort of work because I want to, not because I have to. And I have only two types of investments: high risk venture style startups, personally, and basically bank account like products that yield about 1%, 60 bips to 1%, right? Not really a public markets guy. Well, now it's like, I like that those could equal out, because if I make 80x on a deal over here, it offsets my 100 basis points over here. But I also like the fact that, I'm investing in things that can have long-term benefit to me in terms of the amount of money I can actually get, because they're capital gains, not ordinary income. And that's why I'm willing to stick it out. Like, these are long windows. So basically what the government's saying, they're not saying this because they're not thinking about it this way. Hey, why don't you put your money into something super high risk, wait 10 years, and then if you get it back out, we'll just take it away from you the same way we would have if you were just doing anything else. Well, how is that going to incent people to invest in the single most important job creation engine in this country, right? Small and medium businesses and entrepreneurs create more jobs in this country than anything else, period. We are a dominant player in the economy. You look at the top 10 public companies, they are startups, right? The Google, the Facebook, the Microsoft. I mean, Apple, these were startups a while ago, but they were startups, right? Did they get the same chance to raise their money if you had this usurious capital gains ridiculousness? I don't think so. I will say to anybody that's thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, and to people that are starting to invest in early stage companies, make sure you learn about QSBS, because that is one gift the government gave us that we still get. And that does help a lot. But man, like, I'm now thinking, what do I have to do now? How do I change my world? Like, I guess I'm going to have to understand municipal bonds and tax-free products, because I'm now going to have to spend an inordinate amount of time trying to find ways to eliminate all the income I have during the year to keep myself below the number that would trigger a material capital gains. But then again, if I have $1 million, I just had a $1.7 million outcome in a company. And it's like, oh, well, then even if I had zero income, I'm all of a sudden in the highest possible range for capital gains. But wait, sort of to your point of the entrepreneur that works their whole life and then gets one single outcome, I'm like, that was 7 years in the making. It does seem, look, I'm a little obsessive about fairness, and it seems disgustingly unfair to me. So I think it's ridiculous and stupid, and I hope it doesn't get through. And I think we've got the best entrepreneurial community in the world in the United States. Nobody holds a candle to us. China's doing a decent job, but we're number one by a huge spread. Why would you F with that engine? I would guess if you look at I get that there's all kinds of funky stuff that corporations do to move their income around, et cetera, but man, like, you get good liquidity. I think a third of the capital gains liquidity on the people that, took money off the table when an Airbnb went public or a Pinterest went public adds up to a lot of money. So why are you going to go over there and poke them in the face? Hey, stop doing that, is basically what you're saying. Why don't you find another place to put your money? It's really interesting for me because now I'm about to go raise this independent fund. And now I have to see, well, what if they attack my ability to get capital? I'll have to totally change the structure. Why would I be motivated to invest other people's money if I'm doing it at ordinary income? I guess I'd have to find a way where I get my carry in portions of the company. It's not like people are going to sit around and go, oh, great, I'm really excited about. look, I'm fine paying taxes. I understand there's a lot of things this country needs to do. I don't necessarily just agree with all of them, but I'm not going to be like, I'm not giving you my money because I don't believe you should spend on the military or whatever. But, talk about tax and spend. It's just getting silly at this point. And to attack capital gains, to basically attack business investment, startup investment, entrepreneurship. Oh man, that is just all kinds of stupid.
Yeah, I'm really.
And by the way, I would bet there's great data to show that it has never worked. Money's not dumb. Money will flow somewhere else. And what would you rather have? Okay, maybe this is all about getting everybody to put their money into municipal bonds. I'm just making this up. I'm thinking of this on the top of my head. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I guess if I'm not going to get treated well for taxable stuff, I might as well put it all in non-taxable stuff. Well, the states are going to be hurting, I assume, and are going to need money. So maybe that's what they need to see happen. Maybe that's why they think it's okay. I mean, it's literally in my view, as a simpleton, the stupidest thing I've ever heard anybody in politics do. And just so destructive and so short-sighted. We suffer in this country, in our healthcare and in our tax policy, from a lack of ability to understand that an ounce of prevention is worth 24 pounds of cure. You're going right to the heart of entrepreneurship and job creation and startups, and you're just trying to put a knife in it. Just so poorly thought out.
Yeah, what really worries me is that you're talking about decisions at the margin, like of investors and entrepreneurs, but I'm thinking of a country as a platform. So I've had a very interesting background, in Alex too. So I was born in a communist country, and then I grew up in Israel for most of my life. And then I came to the US in 2010. And what's amazing about the US and why I love this country so much is because it has been able to commercialize ideas better than anybody else in the world. Like, just think of the biggest things: the airplane, the computer, telephone, radio, all of these things, even if they were invented elsewhere, many of them were invented here, but like, even if they were invented elsewhere, like Marconi, an Italian guy, I think, invented the radio, but it was commercialized here. And the reason why it is so good to commercialize things here, because A, property rights are very strong. So you have kind of a tacit agreement that things will not change on you mid-game, and B, the capital gains tax was pretty low, and you can see how low capital gains taxes are just like essential for a flourishing economy. Like, the USSR had just great scientists. Their scientists weren't worse than the scientists in the US, but they had 100% tax, pretty much, right? They would take everything from you.
Founders were Russian emigres, right? So, the structure here was much more appealing to them.
Yeah, exactly. And in the Middle East, for example, you look at Dubai. The reason why Dubai is doing so well, and literally in a huge area where countries are struggling, is because the same thing, like very low taxes, very strong rule of law, and like not changing the rules of the game. And this worries me. So because now, they're raising the capital gains. Maybe they'll do it again. Maybe
I worry a lot about unintended consequences. It's funny, like people always, I've done a lot of public speaking internationally, gone to a lot of places that want to be the next Silicon Valley. And they always ask, what do you think? Well, is there room for more than one? I was like, look, there's room for innovation all over the world, but you just can't duplicate the Shangri-La reality of Silicon Valley. It's a magnet for the best and brightest. And once they're here and they get to know other people like them, it's just sparks that create fires. It's great. Well, I read an interesting thesis on why Silicon Valley is so great. I would have thought Stanford kicking out a lot of kids into the world, and then the money coming here, et cetera. Their theory is that it's because California will not allow a non-compete. And because it is not legal to have a non-compete, people can leave great companies and start other businesses that are awesome. While in some other states, they can't. So that may have been something, the unintended consequence of which is the largest wow in the world of technology innovation and these days of wealth creation. So, I worry a lot about what, as you said, on the edge, it's just, if you're thinking about where to put the amount of capital that is flooded into venture style investing over the last decade is just stunning, because they're looking for yield. Right? Because you're just not getting it in traditional investments. But if all of a sudden the gross yield and the net yield come out to this, the gross is bigger, but the net's the same. I mean, why would you discourage this? Why would you discourage what I truly believe is the growth engine of the United States? It's not incremental jobs at Ford, right? Like, Tesla is what moves the United States job economy, not GM. and to disincline the next person, entrepreneur or investor, to help those things happen. I mean, it's not like, okay, yes, I can't work so hard at a regular day-to-day job to earn the same amount I can as investing in a startup. But, risk is high. Liquidity time is long. So I guess I just have to find other things. Like I don't know. Like, I'm an independent that's sort of fiscally conservative and socially liberal, and this is the stupidest fiscal decision I've ever seen. It's not a decision yet, and I hope it gets fought against. And I think even, hopefully even intelligent Democrats will understand what a stupid and ridiculous idea it was. And I'm whether it gets bogged down or shut down, as long as it doesn't go through, that's what I care about. But, can I control it? No. But how many other people are out there thinking about this and are talking about the fact that you don't have to lean whatever left or right or red or blue to want to have a strong economy that encourages innovation and investment, right? Like, that's not a political thing. That's just smart.
Completely.
And so I have to believe a lot of people will be very verbal and hopefully tell their representatives, this is a stupid thing and you should fight against it.
Yeah, completely. And we're talking about the same thing. We're both, I think, pretty, just like you, we're socially liberal and fiscally conservative. And I wrote both of my senators a week ago or a few days ago when this came out. This is one of those policies that I hope he's just using as a negotiating position, because politically, by the way, I think politically, this alone would, because you're getting taxed not only at the federal level, but the state level, California, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, all of the major Democratic strongholds, you're getting taxed at 55%. This is going to be Republicans in 2024, easy, who are going to lower the taxes, and people are just going to vote them in.
Scary right now. I mean, the number of people where because we all do our meetings now in Zoom, you don't know where people are. You'd be like, oh, where are you based? Where are you riding out COVID? Where are you sheltering? Yep. It's like, oh, I didn't tell you I moved to Miami. I moved to Austin. Yep. Like, there's a lot of people at the top and not at the top. Like, I know people at the very top of the pile that have moved to other tax environments, one in Florida, one in Lake Tahoe, and then I know lots of entrepreneurs who are just starting out and they're like, forget this. Like, I don't need to be here. People talk about why people leave California for all kinds of reasons, quality of life, expensive homes, homelessness, but net, what cracks the back are the ridiculous taxes. It looks like, it's interesting. I was just reading yesterday. It looks like Newsom will not be able to avoid a recall vote. Mm-hmm. Now, I think I don't have a real strong view one way or the other on him or on that. I am a little surprised that the furor of it was because he went to a restaurant with 10 people or whatever it was. I was like, oh, really?
It's just the straw that broke the camel's back. Yeah, look, I live 2 blocks from Nancy Pelosi and Pacific Heights in San Francisco, and our bike got stolen from the 4th floor of a building with a doorman while my wife was sleeping. My pregnant wife was sleeping, and we don't lock our like balcony door. It's just crazy. It's just like incompetent.
You put up with that until your taxes are so ridiculous that you start to say to yourself, look, I had a liquidity event. I was living in New York City. I decided we didn't want to raise our kids in New York. And then, liquidity was on the, within the next year or two horizon. So we moved to Lake Tahoe. We moved to a tax-free state. And because we were on the Nevada side. And I did the math. It was like, well, at the time, New York was the highest tax in the nation because you had New York State, New York City, and borough of Manhattan. And I was like, well, multiply X by 12%. And even if I'm not being venal for the personal use of that capital for my family, like, okay, fine. For every 10 million out, that's $1 million too. I could do a lot of charitable good. Exactly. And I could set up a foundation. And you know what? I'm sorry, but I'm really confident I'm a better steward of that money and providing good for it than shoving in yet another boondoggle, pork-laden BS pile of dung. I generally speaking, one of the reasons I'm independent, I don't trust any of them. Republican, Democrat, they're all, politicians, it's like, I don't know why anybody gets into that life. They don't get into that. Maybe they get into that life to change the world, but they very quickly figure out that they can't. There was a guy that was running for office, I think it was in California, somebody I knew very casually, and he dropped out of the race. And the question was why? He said, well, I was approached by the unions. I think it was the unions. And they said, if you do not support our agenda over time, we will make sure all of our people vote against you. But if you do, we'll have them vote for you. It's like, oh my God, we're living in the 20s. But, net, it's Yeah, it's interesting. You read politicians' memoirs later and they apologize. I've seen this so many times. Like, I feel really badly that I had to eviscerate my opponent for a topic, so and so, where I actually personally agreed with him, but it was not what my base needed to hear. And it's like, oh, so you basically have absolutely no integrity at all, which I would argue is pretty definitively what I would personally view most politicians to hold, a 0 to 2% integrity level. So net, I'd rather, and so when you can actually do the math and you're seeing an opportunity for all of your labors. So look, I took my company public when I was 33, but I was an entrepreneur since I was 12. That's a long journey to get to liquidity, man. You know, I'd like to be able to direct that capital as I see fit within reason. Perfectly fine paying my taxes, but you know, I obviously would like them to be lower. But you know, they're high now. It's funny. There was a buddy of mine here. We're having dinner. He's a far more achieved and affluent person than I. Like, he has buildings with his name on them, and he's like, Ben, you know, we're already paying 57% in California. And I was like, I don't want to know. He's like, no, let me add it up for you. I'm like, no, I pay my accountants. I write the check. I sign the documents. I do not want to know. I don't want to sit here mired in the fact that I'm giving the government more money than I get to keep. I try to overpay my taxes because if I ever get audited, I want a refund. You know, I don't take every deduction I can. It's like, I don't want to mess with, you know, the old saying about death and taxes, you can't avoid either. My attitude is death and taxes, you don't want to mess with either of them. But I'll take the legal, you know, now I'm being, you know, it's like a place where, okay, I guess I'm actually gonna have to spend a lot of time and money figuring out how not to get absolutely, totally, and completely, screwed by a new structure. As long as, but if they don't kill QSBS, that'll help because, you know, it will make people more obsessive about making sure they stay qualified. I think.
I want to tie a couple of points together because you talked earlier about, you know, this ADX and you know, having a big hit investment, and Shimon talked about using country as a platform. And so, and also we talked about a point very early on about how, you know, believing in something going against the grain. And so Shimon and I are both big believers in Bitcoin and crypto, but specifically Bitcoin. And we've been in the space for ages, it seems like. But the way things are going, you know, money printing now, high taxes, especially taxes on capital gains, we almost see the world shifting, and network effects that we talked about, into this space of, instead of cities and states competing for citizens the way we have in the US or for industry, we almost see countries in the long term competing for, I want to start tying this up to kind of wrap us up, but we see countries competing for labor, for entrepreneurship, and for innovation. And the only way for us that you could do that is through crypto, is through Bitcoin, because it's something that's very portable and you can take your wealth, port it out. And we're very lucky in the US, as Shimon pointed out, by having, you know, good capital controls so far, good property rights, not so much in the rest of the world. I want to, as we kind of wrap up and bring all these themes together, how do you view this? Do you see countries becoming platforms for innovation and competing against each other for innovation?
I know that, you know, from having been invited to keynote conferences at places, like, as an example, quite a while ago, it was like probably 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, before relations with them just fell apart, I was invited to keynote the opening of Sokobo. Sokobo was Moscow's attempt to build a Silicon Valley-like ecosystem. And, you know, it was like, wow. First of all, you know, my long ago, there's Russian in my family, but I've never been to Russia. So I was like, okay, you're going to fly me over. It sounds cool. There were so many things wrong with that. Like, first of all, the place was like 40 minutes outside of Moscow, surrounded by mud. They spent billions of dollars to build like a crappy version of the Javits Center. The day they opened, they had a fire because the technology didn't work. So anyway, my point being, it takes a lot to create a competitive landscape that's appropriate to entrepreneurs. It takes laws, it takes institutions, it takes ecosystems. So here's the reason I think no one's knocking Silicon Valley off the pedestal. Everybody in this community is in some way motivated to see entrepreneurs win. The lawyers will basically defer or work for free in the beginning. The accountants, you know, like everybody has something where they want to be part of it and they want to help. And, you know, you have lots of great institutions like Stanford and Berkeley and even smaller schools. You have very entrepreneur-friendly laws in terms of things like the no ability to sue your employee for going and starting a similar company. You've just got so much. So I think the problem, and it's like when I like what France is doing, I think they're doing a good job. Israel's doing a great job. But when I go and talk to these governments and these people, you know, what I try to emphasize is it's not one thing. It's not just the plant and equipment. It's not just having a cool building. It's everything. And it's taxation, you know, like you've got to encourage, the way you encourage entrepreneurship in many ways is to encourage investment in entrepreneurship. And once that happens, you know, so I mentioned QSBS. Well, interestingly, I have this company where, like I was talking about it earlier, I'll sell my shares and make 40x. Okay, it was QSBS eligible. And basically with QSBS, you just get a discount on your capital gains. But you have to have held to the company for 5 years. So it very intelligently is encouraging people to make long-term investments in high-risk early startups. The company can have more than 50 million in assets in order to qualify, right? So you have to go in early, you have to take real risk, and you have to stay long-term. Well, now I'm getting this nice big outcome, but it's only been a year and a half. Under QSBS rules, I can roll that money into another QSBS eligible company and not have to pay capital gains tax. I can defer it. And if that company, and I get to pull in the year and a half. So short version of this is a year and a half in, I make 40 times my money. If I invest all that money and 3.5 years later it comes out, I get a reduction in my capital gains. But here's the thing, I am enormously motivated to invest that 40x multiple of cash. That means for every $25,000 I invest in the beginning, I'm now motivated to put $1 million to work, right? What better way to encourage entrepreneurship than have people like me actively out there looking for places to put that money? They've done similar things in real estate where you can take your gain and roll it forward, et cetera, and it's done great things for real estate development, right? Our prior president was very proud of how much it did for him in many ways that maybe people don't agree with and we're seeing as a little slippery. But it's when it's funny. I was talking to a buddy of mine who happens to be Israeli, and we were talking about this guy that we both worked with, and he just was always having these convoluted plans and trying to get people motivated. And he's like, why doesn't he just understand you put the carrot in front of the horse, right? You tell them how they're going to make the money. And that's, as someone said a couple of days ago, it's the rule of the coin. How do you make the coin happen? The person that's, if I know that by doing X, I can make Y, but by doing Z, I can make half Y. It doesn't take a brilliant mind to figure out where to choose to pursue. So I don't want to go back to taxation. My point is it's everything. It's the laws, it's taxation, it's the ecosystem, it's the people that are willing to do the work. Here's another thing. Okay, so like I spent a bunch of time in Europe before COVID, and there's a lot of exciting opportunities, but here's my biggest question mark as I did more and more diligence. You get these awesome entrepreneurs and you get these awesome engineers, but in the middle, you do not have enough people with management level C-suite experience that have seen hyper growth. And so they have to learn from scratch. One of the great things about Silicon Valley, you need a CFO that's gone and jumped into a company at $100 million of revenue and taken it all the way through IPO. There are plenty of those. You need like a growth guy that's done the same thing. You need a sales guy that's built a team from nothing to wow. Like those people are all over the place here. And that's great. But they're not all over the place everywhere. So you do need a lot of different things. I think when we talk about like cryptocurrencies and things like that, that is, I did a Bitcoin and bourbon lunch like 8 years ago. So I've been paying attention for a long, long time. I'm fascinated with NFTs though, because my first business was a collectibles business. So I like the category, but net, I'm more intrigued by Bitcoin and blockchain related products because they are slower and more expensive than a lot of things, as both sort of a neutral playing field across the globe. And also, let's face it, if I'm I don't know what Brazil's economy is like right now. I don't know, whatever the sort of ultra inflation economy is, and I can either sit on my local currency and worry that it's worth half as much when I wake up in the morning or put it into this thing. Well, it's a store of value. I do think it still remains incredibly speculative, and I don't love that. I would love to see a stable coin that people actually endorsed, where it's less about speculation and going from $20,000 a coin to $50,000 a coin, and more about a totally liquid, totally decentralized unit of trade that is tied to I don't care what basket of currencies, maybe US, China, Euro, right? And then I just use that and get my transaction costs down, because right now, you wouldn't be buying a cup of coffee for a Bitcoin. Let's put it that way. Although there's that great story about the guy that bought a pizza for a Bitcoin, but we don't need to go there.
Yeah, well, Ben, thank you so much. This was fascinating. Can you please tell our listeners, how can they find you? How can they learn more about your work? Get in touch?
Sure. I have changed my model on LinkedIn. I used to only accept invitations from people I physically met, but now that nobody meets physically, I accept all my LinkedIn invitations. So, send me a link and I'm happy to connect. I'm at Narasin on Twitter. I tweet all the time. I'm open for DMs there. But if you want to pitch me a business, the best way is www.pitch-ben.com. I set this up a while ago because it's really important to me that I'm a huge believer that any, like diversity, I don't care what you look like, where you came from. I want you to be smart, driven, and tenacious with a phenomenal idea that can turn into a huge market. And so pitch-ben with the dash symbol, pitch-ben.com allows anybody anywhere in the world to pitch me a 1-minute video, and I promise them a 1-minute response. I'm not always that timely, I'll admit it, but I get caught up every once in a while. So it's often just advice, but some of those companies I go on to future meetings. So it's a way that people can get in front of me. And if you got people that want to invest in me, well, hit me up on LinkedIn and I'll tell you about Purple Octopus. Purple Octopus, by the way, I'll just close with this. When I'm asked about diversity and I talk about how I do not care, like I've got 80 entrepreneurs and they're a rainbow. I mean, it's a larger percentage of female founders than most people have. It's everybody from African Americans to First Nations. It's just like, I didn't even know. Someone asked me to analyze it once, so I had to go look. And I was like, well, who is this person? But, like when I have this phenomenal entrepreneur that told me about how he grew up and they were actually protected by law because they're a First Nations tribe with their right to hunt, I forget, like seal or something, which freaked me out. But, it's a fascinating thing. Anyway, so Purple Octopus, what I've always said is I don't care what you look like. I don't care where you came from. I want you to be smart, tenacious, driven with an awesome idea that can turn into something huge. And I hope one day to fund a sentient and sapient Purple Octopus to prove to the world it does not matter. Nothing matters. And by the way, even across venture, which has a varied amount of acceptance of diversity, I will tell you this: if you're doing well enough, nobody cares. Nobody cares at all. If Mark Zuckerberg was a Purple Octopus, people would have just been as excited about funding him as he is as a white Harvard kid, from an immigrant family, if I remember correctly. So thank you for having me. And, hopefully we'll survive this idiocy that our government's trying to enact.
Thanks, Ben. And
sure we will.
Yep. Thanks, Ben. And thanks, Shimon, as always. And for listeners, pitch that ben.com at Ben Narasin. We'll put everything in the show notes and listening notes for the podcast. And subscribe, send us feedback. We get a lot of it on LinkedIn and DMs and private messages as well. Tell us your next topics that you'd like to hear about. And as always, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot, everyone.